might start. Hello, I'm Ashley Goodall. I work with the Amar Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which has got a strong musical theme to it. For those of you that don't know Amar, we work very much in Iraq and various other countries like Romania and Lebanon, but providing healthcare and education to the poorest people. And in Iraq, very much the work recently has been on helping the Yazidi population in the camps in the north of Iraq. And one of the key projects we've been working on is mental health, helping to improve the lives and those people, particularly who've been attacked by Daesh and captured as slaves to the world. Could I just say hello to Dobbs there? He's just joined us from America. Good morning, America. And just to say that we are particularly interested in, we have recently put some music into the camps in northern Iraq, which has had strong effect on the children and the people that have been the beneficiaries of it. So music has very much been a source of mental health well-being and has actually helped a lot of the Yazidi girls to overcome the traumas that they've had. So we see it as an incredibly powerful medium, and we'd like to explore that further. And the ultimate thought for us here is really to start to persuade the UN to incorporate mental health into their mandate for the refugees in the camps, and at the same time to incorporate music as part of the solution to that mental health. So we're just going to talk about that today. I've got a super cast of people here. They're all top-end musicians, and I think we're going to have a lot of chat and fun, as musicians do. We've got a quartet, I must say. We have Paul Mclinden, who is a celebrated conductor, and actually, I'm just going to say he's written this book called The Story of the National Orchestra of Iraq, which he's written, and that gives you a clue as to what he's been up to. Paul is currently working with the Glasgow Barons and doing regenerative projects up in Glasgow, which is really exciting in the Govan region. On my right, I have Professor Michael Bachmann, who is a wonderful teacher at the Trinity Laban College of Music and also runs children's choirs and was actually instrumental in running the music project that Amar run in Iraq. So we'll be hearing some detail of him, particularly of the Iraqi girls choir. And hello, Mr. Dobbs, Richard Hartshorn. I hope you can hear me. Very pleased to have you on board. Thank you for calling. We have people going to bed in Iraq. We have the English here in the middle of the rainy day, and we have Dobbs over in America. So we're spanning the globe today, and I think some of the people listening in are also from that point of view. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Paul, first of all. And I'm going to ask the panelists the first question, just really to say, what has your work in music been about? You know, what have you done? And with particular reference to Iraq, it'd be great to hear a little bit about what you've done and the benefits and all the wonderful insights and help that you've given young people in Iraq. Paul, over to you.
Well, between 2009 and 2013, I was working as the conductor of the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, and that's why I know Dobbs, because Dobbs worked as the bass tutor of that very same orchestra, and we had a fantastic time together. In a nutshell, the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq brought together people from all over Iraq, of all different backgrounds, who were all playing classical instruments. Western classical instruments, and had very much learnt this themselves during the war. So we were bringing together tutors, like Dobbs, for example. We were bringing together Kurdish and Arabic Iraqi composers to write for us, and we were playing Beethoven and Haydn, and so on and so forth. And our job was to run a classic summer camp once a summer every year, and to keep it going for as long as possible. It was a reconciliation project involving music, the power of music bringing people together and finding common purpose.
Thank you very much, Paul. Did you want to play anything, a video at all, for example, or just show a little bit of a flavour of what went on? Or would you like to do that in the second part?
I lined up our chamber music concert in Erbil in front of a girls' audience, a girls' school, from 2011. If we can just show the beginning of that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Paul. I think something you might like to maybe go into later, but with one of the objectives there, what were the objectives and why are the girls significant?
The objectives there were simply to introduce elements of music education and also community music making and musical instruments to young girls in Iraq. Particularly important for girls because the weight of gender balance, there is imbalance in the music world in Iraq, where it is more a men's activity than a girls' and women's activity. So girls are less encouraged to make music in Iraq than boys are, and we thought that this was a wonderful opportunity to introduce lots of young, very energetic and enthusiastic girls to the joy and the power of music.
Thank you. I will go into much more detail later, but I'd like to come to Professor Michael Bachmann. Michael, maybe you could tell us a little about what you got up to when you went to Iraq.
Thank you, Ashley. And Paul, I'm so thrilled to see all those girls involved in Iraq. It's amazing. This was rather different from what Paul was doing. It was to rehabilitate and bring mental health back to the Yazidi people who are all living in camps. Those of you who don't know, in 2014, Daesh came and absolutely massacred them. And a lot of the young women were taken away, sex slaves and men were killed. It was a terrible situation. And so what the ambition was to get music going in the camps. They're now all in camps. And so we got the traditional musicians to teach the younger ones, and lots and lots of young people came and learned instruments. Then that gave way as a next stage to the girls' choir, which we specifically got together. And there were 5 girls who had not been prisoners of ISIS, and then 5 who had. And very interesting, they had an incredible relationship and they rehearsed for 4 hours every day. They were so excited about their music. Would you like to play this, the first short section of the video at this point, because it speaks louder than my words.
Home, safety, joy, family, music. Meet Zara. She is Yazidi. ISIS enslaved her, sold her into a life of daily rape. They destroyed her village, slaughtered her family, and tried to erase her culture. Yazidi culture is housed in music. So, Yazidi musicians were specifically targeted by ISIS to be the first to die. And in entirely erasing the culture of this ancient people, ISIS very nearly succeeded.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say a bit more about the work you're doing there, Michael?
Yes, well, I mean, I just wanted to show that was actually, we worked at this choir of the girls, and they then eventually, they worked so hard, they came to London. And that was a quick video of them playing in London, at the Greenwich Naval College and at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And the work itself was extraordinary because we put up adverts and we wanted girls to take part. And of course, this was funded by the British Council. The British Council say that 50% of the beneficiaries should be female. And so we had a large uptake of girls. And the music sessions, so we had these 2 professionals teaching Yazidi music, were full-time, and they would every day they would have classes, and they had only a certain number of tambours, which is the guitar-like instrument they had, and afterwards they were just sticking together. Now there are 2 things here for the mental health of their characters. I mean, it was unbelievable. They were smiling, many of them and there was a quick clip of what it's like to live in a camp there, and it's grim. And you don't see people, and everybody sort of pulls each other down. You get food, and that's it. But I mean, what does music do? It's unbelievable how it restored, because it said in that video, you know, they are life. Music is their life, and that is exactly, as soon as you introduce music back into there, they were suddenly all bubbling again.
Thank you, Michael. We'll go into a bit more detail of the benefits later. But Dobbs, how do you do? Thank you very much for logging on. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
thank you very much for joining us. And just to say, Richard Hartshorn, or Dobbs, I think you like to be known as, you take music to where no one has ever been before quite often. And I think you worked with Paul originally in Iraq with the Iraqi orchestra, but subsequently you've zoomed off into other areas of vulnerable people and taken music to them. Would you like to tell a little bit about your experiences, and particularly, anything in Iraq you'd like to relate?
Well, I started this program, this nonprofit in 2004, and the idea was to go to places, like you say, that needed music more than any other place. So I began in Palestine and Afghanistan, Uganda. And eventually, when I met Paul, I got into Iraq, and after 2 sessions with the National Youth Orchestra, I had made enough friends among the students to actually use them as a committee for finding me places to play, which I've done ever since.
Where have you been roughly? Could you explain where it's taken you and how that's conveyed you to different places?
In Iraq, you mean?
Yeah, particularly, or yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was 1 year in Baghdad. It was 2012, where the things had quieted down enough for me to be there, and then I've been in Erbil, Rania, Suleimani. I recently came back from Iraq about 3 weeks ago, where I also managed to play at the Halabja monument to the genocide. Basically, my program, in a few words, is that I play one of the suites of Bach on the bass, not in an effort to teach people about music or kids about music, but to give them an emotional experience. Then I play or tell a story with music in their own language. So I've done about 19 different languages. But the upshot of it is that if I'm successful, people listening to the concert have this emotional connection to music. And it doesn't really matter that it happens to be Bach, but it's a deep kind of emotional connection. And then they get a chance to laugh.
I'd love to go into a bit more detail about the emotional connection, what kind of emotion it is. Maybe we could do that in the next section. So thank you for that. It's profoundly wonderful. Paul, could I start back with you to say, I'm really interested at this point to ask what has been the effect and the outcome that music's had on the people that's received it. What kind of benefits do you see coming from the work you did in Iraq? Obviously reconciliation, but maybe more than that.
Well, definitely for a start, as these young people had committed themselves to making music, we were helping them to make music better, and we were giving them lots of ideas. For example, that children's concert that you just saw the video of. Nobody had ever thought of doing a children's orchestral concert in Iraq before. And so in between the summer courses, which were only 2 or 3 weeks long, the students would go back into their towns and villages and set up their own projects, set up their own chamber groups, set up their own ensembles and orchestras, and just do stuff that they now knew was possible to do. And that was the viral effect of the whole project, that it wasn't really just about an orchestra every summer. It was about arming them with motivation and inspiration and ideas. And the other side of it was really, aside from the reconciliation, which was a really important part of it, because the music was the reason why everybody was coming together, it was really also about hope. I mean, hope to me before this project was a fairly intangible thing, but it became so crystal clear as we were working together in Iraq that this was the most tangible product imaginable to work with. And without hope, there would just be utter despair and hopelessness. So it really brought home to me that this, shall we say, amorphous quality was really vital in the summer courses, and also in inspiring what happened after and between the summer courses.
Really interesting. When we had a warm-up yesterday, you also talked about language. And part of the reconciliation, you had people in Kurdish who wouldn't speak in Arabic, and in English. And what was the outcome of that? How did music play a role there?
Well, I mean, the Kurds would very often choose not to speak Arabic, or it was simply never taught to them for various reasons. The Arabs certainly didn't speak Kurdish. The Turkmens, who were coming from Kirkuk, did speak Arabic and Kurdish and Turkmanji. So they, what it meant was that our translators were very busy making sure that the tensions that everybody knew about between the Kurds and the Arabs in particular didn't bubble to the surface, that conflicts were resolved before anything got out of hand. From my point of view, I only ever spoke English, and I had one translator on one side translating everything into Kurdish, another on another side translating everything to Arabic, and I refused to learn either language because that would set me off against the other group.
So yeah, so the thing I'm getting at here is that you did say that by the end of it, music was the communication. They communicated through music.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
In spite of whatever historical tensions existed between the young people, which they had learned from their own cultures, the fact of the matter was, if they were sitting down in their seat in the orchestra, it's only because everybody else was sitting down in their seat in theirs, and nobody could do this without everybody else.
And just to push it further, how did you see them evolve as people over a number of years? I mean, you must have seen them flourish and go international and all those aspects.
Definitely. Many left and studied abroad after the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq and found opportunities all over the world. I would say many of the Kurds and the Arabs, who would under any other circumstances never meet, stayed in touch and talked, very often using English as the common language, as friends. I think it was disarming, is what I would say, because people really got to know each other very intimately. Anybody who's done a National Youth Orchestra course of any country knows what a full-on, intensive, 10-hour-a-day experience it is. And you can't help but get close to the people around you.
Thank you very much. Michael, you saw the girls at first hand, and you did allude already to the benefits. And I know that Amar have done a research project with Dr. Nezar, who was one of the directorates of health in a psychologist and psychiatrist in KRG, and it's had some remarkable outcomes from that. Could you elucidate a bit more on the benefits you saw to the singers and to them as people?
Well, there were two things. One is that we had a festival in SN Camp after we've been learning, and they all got together in an incredible way, and they were playing their own music. And this is the subtle, slightly different thing from what you were doing, Paul, which is absolutely fantastic. What we're doing was actually using their own music, because the Yazidis hadn't got their homes. They were living in camps, and they actually needed to live in their own music. So that was the essential thing. So they brought them back to their homeland, as it were, through their music. And then the second side of it was with the girls' choir. And you have to remember that 5 of these girls, which we saw, had been prisoners and sex slaves of ISIS. I mean, it's really, really grim. And they were walking around looking at the grounds. They couldn't actually hold their heads up. We put them, they started teaching the songs. There was one really, really good girl there who was a really good Yazidi musician, and she led the group. And they would meet, as I say, for 4 hours every day. And it was 2 things. They were singing their own music. They were being in touch with each other. And as if you're a musician, you have to listen. You have to listen to other people.
Hold on, Mike. Sorry, could you say that again?
Something happened. Oh, okay. If you're making music, you have to listen to other people. It's a prerequisite. And as soon as you do that, you're communicating. You don't have to say anything. You communicate by your listening. It's essential to listen and to look. And this communication, which is, as Paul was saying before, greater than words, or whichever language you use, is absolutely essential to this. And these girls, after they've been learning, you could see it over a week, over less than that. Suddenly these girls were looking up, they were smiling, they were enjoying the present moment. I mean, if you've been through horrific experiences, you tend to live in the past. Music, you just have, or whether you know it or not, you're living in the present. And that's the most constructive place to be, as we know. And that's exactly what was happening. It was astounding. And then when they came to London, you know, those girls we saw in that video, they had been victims of rape. And it's, the astounding thing is you could never imagine any of those coming to play, singing in London, and yet they had the confidence to do that. No, music had done that.
I love what you said there about they'd found their home and they'd found their identity again. So through music, they'd recreated that something that had tried to be obliterated was actually persisting.
And what we're in Amar trying to do is, this is a blueprint for what can be done in camps. I mean, those of us who visited camps will know it's very difficult to describe how awful it is, but you've got all the basic creature comforts. You've got a tent, it gets hot, it gets cold, and there's a central place where you can meet. Other than that, nothing happens all day long. And music can do something about this. As soon as you get your traditional music going, you suddenly get a glow in the heart. You could see it in people's faces. This is what happens. And you know, there are 80 million people actually in
Camps.
refugee camps at the moment.
Mm.
You know, just imagine if they were playing their own music.
Places of joy, I think. Thank you very much. And Dobbs, you were talking very much about getting emotional connection. And how does that work? And what have you seen happen as a consequence of your work?
Well, like I said, I spent a couple of weeks in Iraq, and I think I did somewhere around 30 performances in the 2 weeks, mainly at schools, mainly for high school kids. And I do this thing where I play a couple movements of Bach, and then before I play the saraband, I say, when I play this music, I feel something inside. While you're listening, I want you to notice how it makes you feel. And then after I play it, I ask for responses. And it's unbelievable the things that kids will say, or people in general. I do this in prisons as well. But I think, the best comment I've ever got in my life. It was a boys' school. I think there were 14, 15-year-olds. And this boy stood up, and he was almost frothing at the mouth, and he was so moved he could barely speak. And he said, "I've never felt anything like that in my life." So for me, it's a life lesson that if you have at once made this connection, and it has to, I believe that classical music, and especially Bach, makes that connection on a really deep level. Once you've had that, then your response to music for the rest of your life has changed.
Mm. That sounds fantastic. But I'm interested to know, what are the kind of range of emotions? Could you sort of slot them into different groups of response you get? Does it just release whatever's in the person, or do you find certain kinds of emotion come forward? Is it like a therapy effectively or not?
I don't know if it's therapy. It's often kids will say, especially younger kids will say, it reminded me of when my grandmother died. I mean, I've heard that a million times. It's sort of that sad, they pick up on the sort of sadness in the music, and it reflects on something that was sad, but not so much a crisis as just a period of sadness. Although I have, in Palestine especially, I've had kids break down and had to be taken from the room because of, well, recently, a couple of years ago, there was an uncle that had just been killed, and the girl just lost it completely. So it's a vehicle for, like I say, an emotional response.
Yeah, obviously, but
transition to comedy, that becomes a kind of a release, because they've had this sort of emotional, deep experience, and then they're laughing like crazy. And I've always found that audiences that get the most emotional response then laugh the loudest.
It's like going to a funeral. You start off sad and end up very jolly quite often. But yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And Paul, when we were talking the other day, you were talking about the physical effect it has on you, on what music has, how physically it works.
Oh, I see. We're talking about the role of music in Iraq, which in some respects is quite marginalized, in others not. But I think one of the things that really strengthens our passion for the work is our knowledge as professional musicians that everybody is born musical. There's no choice in the matter, we just are. And everybody's got a musical part of the brain that only processes music. And that can be drummed out of you, and loads of people will think that they're tone deaf or whatever as they grow up through childhood. But the fact of the matter is, it's not difficult to reactivate that. If you love listening to music, you're a musician. And that's all that it takes. So really, the projects that we were talking about very much bring all forms of music, not just classical Western, into environments that are quite barren and where you think music would never reach anybody. And ironically, because of the context, the power of the music amplifies itself.
Thank you. Michael, have you got any thoughts on, because you teach a lot of students as well, and do you have any thoughts on seeing the light bulbs going on, the emotional bit? Is there some physical thing that music does?
There is, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the very fact of being together and making music and meeting under this umbrella of music makes people, releases people, and they start smiling. I mean, that was my the effect of the Yazidi camps. And you get this, I mean, because I'm playing the whole time, and as well as teaching, and you get that feeling in a group of musicians, and you sing, I know, Ashley, the whole time in choirs, and you get that. It's just that it's an amazing experience. You touched on Dr. Nazar. Now, what I find very interesting is that as a musician, and Paul and Dobbs will, interesting to know what you think about this. As a musician, you just get an instinct. You see somebody and you make music with it, you smile at them, they may be completely different but you come together within music. What Dr. Nazar did as being a scientist and a psychologist, he actually made a report on this, a very, very comprehensive and important report. But what was interesting is almost as seeing this communication from two different sides, from the scientific side, which he did, and I mean, with music, you can actually see when it's affecting somebody in about 3 seconds. You can't analyze it, you just see it happening there, and you say, oh yes, that's working. And whereas a scientist will look at it from lots of different angles and sort of analyze it and this sort of thing. And then so I was very interested to seeing the whole thing from two different angles. And Dr. Nazar is a great man, actually. He's a really, really great human being. So the combination of those two made it very persuasive.
Well, it's quite interesting because if you ever ask for money, you usually have to do something statistical and quantitative. Tick boxes, fill out information, this is the outcome it's going to have, which is absolutely valid. On the other hand, you could just ask a musician saying, well, did they clap at the end? How do they feel? Did someone just smile? And the qualitative side is so powerful and instantaneous. So, I mean, I think we're all believers in the power of music being an instant thing that you can affect. I mean, Dobbs obviously has it. I mean, how long, Dobbs, does it take people to start feeling emotionally connected and emotional? Is it within minutes? Is it quicker than that? Is it, how is it?
I would say it's almost immediate. I for adults or inmates in prison, I give them a little heads up that they're going to feel something. So they're waiting for it. And with kids, I just start playing without saying a word. But I have literally thousands and thousands of pictures, which I usually hand my camera to somebody or my phone now. And these are drug addicts in Afghanistan or inmates in prison or kids in refugee camps in Palestine. And they all have this look on their face with their kind of leaning forward and universal. But I'd like to comment on something that happened at the youth orchestra camps, which bears on the physical nature of the connection. And we had these little mini buses that would take us from the rehearsal place to the lunch place, and from the hotel to the lunch, and circularly. So it was several times during the day. And early on in one of the trips, I think it was 2011, some of the Kurdish kids started playing this Kurdish I don't know what he was, but he played folk music, but it was kind of a dance music. I mean, dance music, traditional dance music, but not traditional, was commercial dance music. And there were a couple of Kurdish girls who would get up and dance a little bit in their seats, and a few of the Kurdish kids. And by the end of the session, we would have 3 buses. And if you looked from one bus to the next, you could see the whole bus shaking. And everybody would start dancing as soon as they got on the bus. The faculty, the students, the Kurds, the Arabs, everybody dancing to this insane, loud, kind of crazy music. And it was something that, you know, it was like, wow, we get to get on the bus and dance. It was one of the most fun things I've ever done. And it just demonstrated the connection that had been made through playing music, but they were, you know, showing it physically. It was fantastic.
I think we could probably get you down on London buses and London Underground to do the same effect. You have a wonderful effect on the whole nation. Just something that struck me about this is it the kindness of playing to somebody? Musicians are kind, they give, they exchange, they're open, you're giving something to someone, you're sharing something. Is it that act that's as important as anything else? Paul, I mean, you know, you went out there, you put the time in. It's a kind thing to do. That the kindness is in the music too.
Absolutely, and I think fundamentally, even with music that is the most tragic in tone, there is a fundamental deep undercurrent of joy in everything that we have to do. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. If I think of the journey of many of the players in the National Youth Orchestra of Iraq, those first audition videos in 2009, right at that point in the war, which was still bubbling on, depressing, shut down, just tragic, traumatized musicians who could play the notes but couldn't feel a single thing. And watching them over the years flourish into joyful musicians, which is what a natural state for music is supposed to be. I think the power of joy, not just for those of us who facilitate it, but just reaching out and triggering that internal joy that all humans have somewhere in them, no matter how traumatized they are, and helping that to come out of its shell, is part of the infectious nature of what we do. That comes back to the question of building resilience in communities again, because if you make music together, you're building community.
Thank you. Dobbs, I know you play, Bach, of course, is beautiful and mellow and sad, but if you started off doing happy music, do you think it wouldn't have the same effect? And what's your view about the giving of music?
No, I think that serious music is what people need and actually want. I mean, I found this. I play in prisons in this country. I played at level 4. You know, I played on death row in Uganda. I mean, I've played for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups of inmates, and what they respond to is the depth of the music. So I think, you know, when orchestras do Star Wars, I mean, you know, it's nice and everybody likes it and people like, ha, ha, ha. Or, you know, play something fast and happy and the kids will like it. I think they're wrong. I think play something deep and that people, kids, adults, whatever, you know, drug addicts, inmates, they respond to something deep. So I think that the funny part should come later when it's okay. It's like at release.
That kind of plays to Paul's view that it's universal in us all, that we can all respond to it, whoever we are, whatever we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. And Michael, would you like to say anything about that at all? That the exchange of music, maybe the sentiment of it that is conveyed.
Well, I agree with both Dobbs and Paul here. You see, Dobbs, when you play serious music like that, it sort of gets down to your soul, and you somehow, even though it's hard, and it's not happy music in that sense, you experience a joy out of that. And therefore the extreme of joy, the extreme of desolation are in a curious way not that far apart, because you can experience sad music and be together and somehow celebrating it in the same way, and a sort of catharsis about it. And that I experienced enormously when we were doing this project. One thing that, and going back to Dr. Nazar and his report, there's a perception across the world maybe that music is a lovely thing to have. It's a little bit like an icing on the cake. It's not the real cake though. So, you know, if we've got a bit of money left over, we'll do some music. Okay, fine, but it's not the real thing. And I think musicians, and I don't know whether Paul doesn't agree with me, that actually, far from it, it is the cake. I think it is actually the central thing, because nothing like music does the same thing. Nothing, like Paul was saying, that will straddle the language barriers, but music. Nothing except music causes you to be able to play the music. You have to listen. As soon as you listen to somebody, it changes your life. You surreptitiously, or without knowing, you put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. Even if you'd hate that person for a moment, when you're playing music with them, you're in their shoes. You say, oh, what's it like to be this person? And you see a greater realization of your own life and what music is by seeing it through your own eyes, through your own ears, other people's, and they all come together into some unity, which for a short time, which is in the present. I don't think anything but music does that.
I don't think I can top that, Michael. That was a wonderful view of things. I think I might begin to call this to an end, and I don't know if Baroness Nicholson is on the line somewhere, whether she'd like to say something. Emma, are you there? Perhaps not. Okay, well, just to say, Baroness Nicholson originally thought of the idea of the Yazidi Girls Choir, and I think instructed you, Michael, to get it organized. So well done to all of you. And where we are now is we're obviously keen to keep the projects going, to do more. We want to let people know that it's been very successful, to look at possibly doing a number of Yazidi choirs on the same basis. Here we go. Right. So I'd just like to bring our founder and key driver of Amar here. If she's going to come on, I can see the name Baroness Nicholson. The moment she's coming, she herself, of course, is a musician and studied music. So I think we've all got musicians on today, which is rather wonderful, actually. But I can't seem to let her in. Hello, Emma, are you there? Would anyone like to say anything in parting at all? Although Michael, in a way, said it all, I think. But Paul and Dobbs, is anything you'd like to end with?
No, that was perfect.
Yes.
Hang on, Emma's here.
Okay, we're all listening. We're all listening. Hello, Emma. Would you like to end the session for us?
Ashley, thank you very much indeed. What an absolutely fascinating discussion. I've long seen music as the heart of being alive. I studied at the Royal Academy, although I was born deaf. And I've worked a huge amount of my life in refugee camps and with internally displaced people and with the very poor in many areas of the world. And I've seen music, which is why I'm so determined that somehow we managed to get this much higher up the agenda, even if we call it mental health or spiritual identity, it doesn't really matter. We've got to find a way of getting it right into the heart of people in trouble. Because those who are in refugee camps or IDP camps or in absolute despair, it seems to me they have a common thread of things. They're lonely, they're desolate, they're bored, they don't have any earning capacity, they don't have any mental stimulation, lack of spirituality. If they're in camps, they've lost their neighborhoods, they've lost their neighbors, they're actually probably among a lot of people they're terrified of. And then, of course, there's very, very heavy-duty rape. There's a lot of genocide, there's a lot of crimes against humanity at the moment. And it seems to me that what is missing is music, and that this is one of the most simple underlying things that binds us together as people. It gives us joy, it gives us happiness. As Michael has said, it allows us to express the most extraordinarily wide variety of emotions without really doing anything about it. The music brings it all out. So my goal is to try to get music far higher up absolutely every agenda, and most particularly for the lost and most bewildered of the globe, who are the hundreds of millions of people who are in refugee camps or scattered in the most dreadful places in the back ends of horrible cities. And that's my goal, as it were. So Michael Bachmann and I have been working on this together, and it's an absolute joy to hear what else has been happening. We're very, very grateful to be working with Ashley, who's been keeping us all together. And indeed, from the very beginning, Ashley's been at the heart of what Michael and I have been trying to do, the very heart of it. And we've taken the Yazidis as our sort of key example, partly because of what's happened to them is so unspeakably repugnant. It's a sort of modern day Auschwitz, and partly because they are the most lovely people with the most beautiful music. So, but they are not the only ones. I was in Iraq last week and stumbled across another cluster of people who ISIS and people like that have tried to wipe out, and they've got a different type of music. They know the Yazidi music very well. Theirs is different, and that hasn't come out. They've kept very quiet about the whole thing so that they wouldn't be killed. So all over the world, there's these pockets of potential which we can bring out and bring forward. What is missing, of course, in the UN system is a much higher performance of UNESCO. UNESCO isn't in any refugee camps, not their fault, but the UN won't send them there. So really, this whole effort from us all is not just to bring happiness and joy to fellow human beings, it's to try to somehow really get inside the modern system and put music at the heart of it. I think that's what we're all trying to do in different ways. It's been so exciting listening to what you've all been saying. I'm very much the amateur at the back end, but trying hard to support you.
So thank you very much, Baroness Nicholson. And can I thank all our guests today? You've been absolutely astonishing. This is recorded. We will share it. And I'd love it if it could be shared more widely to get this message out. The power of music, the beauty of it, and what it can do for people. So Paul Mclinden, thank you so much. Dobbs, thank you so much. Professor Michael Bachmann, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for listening in. Let's go share the word. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.